The widow stood at the edge of Ouray, Colorado, with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a reputation that preceded her like a funeral procession. And when the mountain man stepped out of the general store that September morning in 1878, their eyes met across the dusty street in a way that would change both their lives forever. Juliette Morrison had arrived on the morning stage coach, her black mourning dress dusty from 3 days of travel through the Rocky Mountain passes. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair pinned severely beneath her bonnet and green eyes that held equal parts defiance and exhaustion. The whispers had started before her feet even touched the wooden boardwalk. She could feel the stares of the townspeople like pinpricks against her skin, could hear the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. Murderer, poisoner, black widow. The words followed her like shadows. Though no charges had ever been filed, no trial had ever been held. Her husband, Edward, had died 6 months ago in Denver, writhing in agony after supper, and the neighbors had talked. They always talked. The doctor had said it was his heart, weakened from years of heavy drinking, but suspicion spread faster than facts in a frontier town. Edward's sister had made sure everyone knew that Juliette had cooked his last meal, that she had inherited his modest savings, that she had shown no tears at his funeral. What they did not know was that Edward Morrison had been a cruel man who saved his worst nature for when the doors were closed and the neighbors could not hear. What they did not know was that Juliette had endured 3 years of a marriage that felt like a prison sentence. What they did not know was that she had cried plenty, just not for the reasons they assumed. But she was free now, for whatever that was worth, and she had come to Ouray because it was far enough from Denver that she hoped to start fresh. The advertisement in the newspaper had promised opportunities for seamstresses and laundresses in the growing mining town. She had skills with a needle and was not afraid of hard work. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into anonymity and build a quiet life where no one knew her name or her history. That hope lasted approximately 15 minutes. The boarding house matron, a pinched woman named Mrs. Hartley, had taken one look at Juliette's letter of introduction, and her face had gone rigid. "I'm afraid we have no rooms available," she said, though Juliette could see through the parlor window that at least 3 rooms stood empty, their doors open to air out the musty interiors. "The advertisement said you had accommodations for working women," Juliette said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That was last week. Things change." Mrs. Hartley's eyes were cold. "I received a telegraph from my cousin in Denver just yesterday. She told me all about you, Mrs. Morrison, about what you did. I did nothing wrong. My husband died of natural causes." "Natural causes?" Mrs. Hartley's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Is that what they are calling murder these days? I will not have a poisoner under my roof, potentially killing my other boarders in their sleep. Good day, Mrs. Morrison." The door closed in Juliette's face with a definitive thud. She stood on the porch for a long moment, feeling the weight of despair settling over her shoulders like a leaden cloak. This was supposed to be her fresh start. This was supposed to be where she could finally breathe freely. She had used most of her money for the stagecoach fare, had enough left for perhaps a week of food and lodging if she could find somewhere to take her. The general store seemed like the logical next step. Perhaps they would know of other boarding houses or families who rented rooms. She crossed the wide main street, avoiding the horse droppings and the deep ruts left by freight wagons, and pushed open the door. The familiar smell of coffee, tobacco, leather, and dry goods greeted her. An older man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for lodging. I just arrived in town and the boarding house is full. Do you know of anywhere else that might have a room to let?" The man's expression shifted from helpful to wary. "You are the woman from the stagecoach. I heard Mrs. Hartley turned you away." News traveled faster than wildfire in small towns. Juliette felt her stomach sink. "Yes, I'm hoping to find work here as a seamstress. I'm skilled with alterations and making garments from patterns. I'm also a good cook and can do laundry if needed." "I'm sure you are a fine cook," the shopkeeper said, and there was an unmistakable edge to his words. "But I do not think you will find many folks in Ouray willing to take a chance on you, Mrs. Morrison. Word is you poisoned your husband back in Denver." "That is not true. It was never proven because it never happened." "Rumors like that do not start from nothing." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I cannot help you." I suggest you take the next stage out of town. Head west to Grand Junction, maybe. Somewhere folks have not heard your story yet." Juliette's hands tightened on the handle of her carpet bag. "I have every right to be here. I have broken no laws." "Maybe so, but that does not mean folks want you here." She turned and walked out, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. The injustice of it threatened to choke her. She had escaped one prison only to find herself trapped in another, this one made of whispered accusations and closed doors. The morning sun was climbing higher, and she had nowhere to go. She walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scattered houses, and then to the wild country beyond. The San Juan Mountains rose up in magnificent peaks around the valley, their slopes covered in golden aspens that shimmered in the breeze. It was beautiful and utterly indifferent to her suffering. That was when she heard the heavy footsteps behind her. "You look like you could use some help." The voice was deep, rough-edged like granite, but not unkind. Juliette turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to have been carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle built from years of hard labor. His chest was a wall of strength beneath a worn flannel shirt. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, slightly unkempt, and his face was weathered by wind and sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling blue-gray like a winter sky, and they held an expression of genuine concern. "I do not need help," Juliette said automatically, though it was a transparent lie. "I think you do." He shifted the bundle of supplies under one massive arm. "I was in the store when you came in, heard what Grayson said to you. Not real neighborly, if you ask me. You heard what he said about me then, about what I supposedly did." "I heard." The mountain man studied her for a long moment. "I also heard you say it was not true. I figure I will make my own judgments about folks, not base them on gossip that traveled over a mountain pass." Juliette felt something crack in her chest, some hard shell of defensiveness. This stranger was the first person in Ouray to offer her even a shred of kindness. "I appreciate that, but it does not solve my problem. I have no place to stay and apparently no prospects for work." "What kind of work are you looking for?" "I can sew, I can cook and clean. I am educated so I can read and write and do figures. I am willing to do almost anything honest to earn my keep." The man was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking something through. "I might have a solution. It is not conventional, but then again, neither is your situation." "I am listening. My name is Quentin Oakes. I live up in the high country, about 5 miles outside town. I'm a trapper and hunter, sell furs and meat to the mining camps and to the hotels in town. I do well enough, but I'm not much for domestic comforts. I can shoot a deer at 200 yards and skin it clean, but I cannot sew a button to save my life. And my cooking is basic at best. I've been thinking about hiring someone to help with those things. A housekeeper of sorts." Juliette's eyes narrowed. She had not survived Edward Morrison by being naive. "And what exactly would this position entail?" Quentin's weathered face actually flushed slightly. "Nothing improper, if that is what you are worried about. I have a cabin with 2 rooms. You would have your own space with a door that locks. I need someone to mend my clothes, keep the place clean, and cook decent meals. In return, you would have room and board and a wage, $20 a month." It was a generous offer, almost too generous, and Juliette's instinct was to be suspicious. But as she looked into Quentin Oakes's steady gaze, she saw no deception there, no hidden motives lurking behind his words. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the conversation, as if he were not accustomed to making such proposals. "Why would you offer this to a woman everyone in town thinks is a murderer?" Quentin shrugged his massive shoulders. "Because everyone in town is probably wrong, and because you look like you need a chance. I'm a pretty good judge of character. Spent enough years in the wilderness reading animal signs and tracking prey. You learn to see things for what they are, not what people say they are. You do not strike me as a killer. You strike me as someone who has had a run of bad luck." "That is one way to put it. Besides," and here Quentin's expression shifted to something that might have been the ghost of a smile, "if you were planning to poison me, I reckon I would have a better chance than most of surviving it. I have eaten things in the mountains that would kill a regular man. Spoiled jerky, half-frozen fish, berries that turned out to be less edible than I thought. My stomach is cast iron. Despite everything, despite the awful morning and the crushing weight of rejection, Juliette felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. It came out half laugh, half sob. That's a terrible recommendation for my cooking skills. I am just saying, you would have a hard time killing me with food, poisoned or otherwise. I am pretty much indestructible when it comes to meals. His expression grew more serious. Look, I know this is a strange offer from a stranger, but I am giving you my word, as a man, that you will be safe and treated with respect. You can ask anyone in town about me. They will tell you Quentin Oakes is honest, maybe too blunt sometimes, but honest. Juliette looked back toward the town, where closed doors and hostile faces awaited her. Then she looked at the mountains, wild and free, and at the man who stood before her offering what might be her only lifeline. I want to see the cabin first, she said, and I want your word, your solemn promise that this arrangement is purely for work. You have it. Then I accept. The journey to Quentin's cabin took them through terrain that grew progressively more rugged and beautiful. They followed a narrow trail that wound up through groves of aspen and pine, crossing a crystal-clear creek twice before emerging into a high meadow. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing, backed against a wall of rock and pine. It was larger than Juliette had expected, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Inside, the main room held a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves filled with supplies and tools, and a cooking area with a cast-iron stove that looked well used. Animal pelts hung on the walls, and the antlers of an impressive elk were mounted above the door. Everything was neat enough, but had that unmistakable air of a space occupied by a man who did not care much about creature comforts. Your room is through there, Quentin said, nodding toward a door on the far wall. It used to be a storage space, but I cleared it out last year thinking I might eventually want help. There's a bed frame. I can bring up a mattress from town next time I go. Juliette opened the door and found a small but serviceable room with a window that looked out over the meadow. The bed frame was simple but sturdy, and there was a small chest for storage. A peg on the wall would serve for hanging clothes. It was sparse, but it was private and clean, and right now that seemed like a luxury. It will do nicely, she said. Good. Quentin set his supplies on the table. I will let you get settled. There's a pump out back for water. Outhouse is about 30 yards east of the cabin. I will be working on some pelts in the shed if you need anything. And just like that, he left her alone, giving her space and privacy without being asked. Juliette stood in the center of the main room and felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly for the first time in months. Perhaps this arrangement would work. Perhaps she had finally found a place where she could breathe. The first week passed in a cautious dance of establishing routines and boundaries. Juliette took to her new role with determination, throwing herself into the work as a way to prove her worth and to avoid dwelling on the disaster her life had become. She woke at dawn and started the fire in the stove, made strong coffee the way Quentin liked it, prepared breakfast. He was not a man of many words in the morning, usually just a nod of thanks before he headed out to check his trap lines or hunt in the high country. While he was gone, she cleaned the cabin thoroughly, organized the supplies, and took inventory of what needed mending. Quentin had not been exaggerating about his skills with a needle. His clothes were held together with crude stitches and hope. She spent hours carefully repairing shirts, patching trousers, and reinforcing seams. She washed everything in the cold creek water, scrubbing against rocks until her hands were raw, then hung the laundry to dry in the mountain sun. Cooking was a revelation. Quentin ate everything she prepared with genuine appreciation. The first night, she made a simple stew with venison, potatoes, carrots, and herbs she found growing wild near the cabin. She watched nervously as he took the first bite, that old fear rising up. What if he got sick? What if history repeated itself? But Quentin just closed his eyes and made a sound of deep satisfaction. This is the best thing I have eaten in about 5 years, he said, maybe 10. It is just stew. It is amazing stew. You have a gift. Over the following days, she made biscuits, roasted game hens, fried trout that Quentin caught in the creek, baked bread, and even attempted a dried apple pie with the fruit she found in his stores. Each meal was met with the same enthusiastic response. Quentin ate like a man who had been starving for home cooking, which, she supposed, he had been. "You are not joking about eating anything," she said one evening as he finished his third helping of rabbit stew. "I told you, cast iron stomach. But this is not about that. You are genuinely talented in the kitchen. You should not have any trouble finding work as a cook if you wanted it. Except, no one in town will hire the woman who supposedly poisoned her husband." Quentin looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. "You want to talk about what really happened?" Juliette had been dreading this conversation, but also knowing it would come eventually. She took a breath and told him the truth. She told him about Edward Morrison, about the charming courtier who had won her over with poetry and promises, and about the cruel husband he had become after the wedding. She told him about the drinking, the rages, the way he controlled every aspect of her life. She told him about that last night, about serving him the pork roast and potatoes, about going to bed and waking to his groans of agony. She told him about the doctor who said it was heart failure, and about the neighbors who decided it must have been poison. "I did not kill him," she said quietly, "but I will not pretend I mourned him the way a wife should. I was relieved. Does that make me a terrible person?" Quentin was quiet for a long time, his rough hands wrapped around his cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "It makes you human, and it makes you someone who survived a bad situation. I have known men like your husband, the kind who are all smiles in public and monsters behind closed doors. The frontier is full of them. I do not blame you for being relieved, and I certainly do not think you killed him. How can you be so sure? Because if you were going to poison someone, you would not have done it in a way that drew suspicion to yourself. You are too smart for that. And because I have watched you cook every meal this week with care and attention, that is not the behavior of someone cavalier about food safety." It was such a practical, straightforward assessment that Juliette felt a rush of gratitude. No flowery protestations of her innocence, no dramatic declarations, just simple logic from a man who saw the world clearly. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me, for giving me a chance. Everyone deserves a chance." As the weeks passed, Juliette found herself settling into the rhythm of mountain life. She had expected to feel isolated and lonely so far from town, but instead she felt free. The forest was alive with sounds and movements, a constant source of wonder. She watched deer graze in the meadow at dawn, saw eagles soaring overhead, heard the haunting calls of elk in the distance. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and earth. The sky at night was filled with more stars than she had ever imagined existed. And there was Quentin. She found herself noticing things about him, the way he moved with surprising grace for such a large man, economical and efficient in his actions. The way he could sit perfectly still while watching the forest, becoming almost part of the landscape. The way he spoke to animals he encountered with respect and even affection, even the ones he hunted. The way his face softened when he smiled, which was not often but all the more impactful when it happened. He was patient with her questions about the wilderness, teaching her to identify animal tracks, showing her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, explaining how to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of birds. He never made her feel foolish for not knowing things, just shared his knowledge freely. She noticed the way he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger when they walked in the woods together. The way he carried heavy water buckets without being asked. The way he insisted she keep the warmest blanket for her room when the nights started getting colder. The way he looked away quickly if she caught him watching her, as if he were embarrassed to be caught. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in with frightening speed. The wind howled through the canyon and rain lashed against the cabin walls. Thunder cracked overhead like rifle shots, and lightning illuminated the room in brief, stark flashes. Juliette had never experienced a mountain storm before, and she found herself standing frozen in the center of the main room, watching the violence of nature through the window with equal parts terror and awe. "It is something, is not it?" Quentin said from his chair near the fire. "Weather up here does not fool around. Is the cabin safe? Built it myself. It is weathered worse than this. We are fine." A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and before she could think about it, she had moved closer to the fire, closer to him. Quentin looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You are safe here, Juliette. I promise you that. Nothing is going to hurt you, not while I am here." The sincerity in his voice, the absolute conviction, made her eyes burn with unexpected tears. When was the last time someone had made her feel protected, rather than threatened? When was the last time she had felt this safe? "Thank you," she whispered. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, with the fire crackling and Quentin's steady presence nearby, Juliette felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. November brought the first heavy snows, and with it, a shift in their relationship. The casual politeness that had characterized the first months gave way to something warmer, more familiar. They began to talk more in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts. Quentin told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war, about learning to survive in the mountains from an old trapper named Red Jack, who had taken him under his wing. "Red Jack taught me everything I know about living up here. He was half wild himself, more comfortable with animals than people. But he was a good man. When he died, I buried him up on that ridge." Quentin pointed out the window toward a high point visible in the moonlight. "He said he wanted to be someplace he could see the whole valley. I visit him sometimes, tell him how things are going." Juliette told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was young, her father who had worked himself to death trying to provide for her, about her brief, hopeful romance with Edward and the crushing disappointment of what followed. "I thought marriage would be a partnership," she said. "I thought it would be someone to face the world with. Instead, it was just a different kind of prison." "Not all marriages are like that." "How would you know? You have never been married." "True. But I have seen good marriages. My parents had one. They worked side by side on their farm, raised 6 kids, and you could tell they genuinely enjoyed each other's company even after 30 years. That is what it should be like." "That sounds like a fairy tale." "Maybe. But I would rather believe in fairy tales than settle for misery." It was during one of those quiet evenings that Juliette realized she was falling in love with him. The recognition came suddenly, like stepping into unexpected sunlight. She was mending one of his shirts, and he was carving something from a piece of wood, the knife moving expertly in his large hands. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. She loved his steadiness, his quiet strength, the way he treated her with respect and kindness, without expectation of anything in return. She loved his rough humor, his knowledge of the wild world around them, the way he seemed completely comfortable in his own skin. She loved that he never tried to control or diminish her, that he listened when she spoke and valued her opinions. But the realization also filled her with fear. She could not afford to love again. She could not risk putting her heart in someone's hands only to have it crushed. And beyond that, what could she possibly offer a man like Quentin? She was damaged goods in the eyes of society, a woman with a reputation she could never fully escape. He deserved better than the shadow she brought with her. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not realize she had stopped sewing, was just sitting there staring at him. "Something wrong?" Quentin asked, looking up. "No, nothing. I was just thinking." Looked like serious thoughts. Just wondering about the future, about what happens when spring comes. "What do you want to happen?" It was such a direct question, so typically Quentin, that she found herself answering honestly. "I do not know. I know I cannot go back to the life I had before. But I do not know if I can stay here forever either. This is your home, your life. I am just passing through." Quentin set down his carving and looked at her with those steady blue-gray eyes. "What if I do not want you to be just passing through?" Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper, but as something more?" "Quentin, I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never felt this way about anyone. Juliette, I wake up in the morning looking forward to seeing you. I come back from the trap lines thinking about what you might have cooked for dinner and what we will talk about that evening. You have made this place feel like a home instead of just a shelter. You have made me feel less alone." Juliette felt tears prick her eyes. "I am not what you think I am. I am broken. I have a past that will follow me everywhere. People will always think I murdered my husband. I do not care what people think. I care what I know. And I know you are smart, strong, kind, and brave. I know you survived something terrible and came out the other side. I know you make me want to be a better man." He stood and crossed to her, kneeling so they were at eye level. His massive frame somehow made the gesture even more tender. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm just asking you to think about it, about maybe building a life here with me, a real partnership, the kind you said you wanted." She reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. "I think about it already, every day, but I'm afraid." "Of me? Of losing this, of being happy and then having it ripped away again, of bringing my darkness into your light." Quentin covered her hand with his own, his palm completely engulfing hers. "Life does not come with guarantees, but I can promise you this. I will never hurt you the way he did. I will never try to control you or diminish you. I will spend every day trying to make you happy, and if I fail, you can tell me and I will try harder. That is the best I can offer. That is more than I ever dreamed of having. Is that a yes?" She leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that held all the words she could not yet say. When they pulled apart, Quentin was smiling, a full, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. "I'm going to take that as a maybe," he said softly. "It is a maybe heading strongly toward yes." They sat together by the fire, her hand in his, and talked into the night about possibilities and futures. Quentin spoke about expanding the cabin, adding a real bedroom, and maybe a workshop where Juliette could sew. She talked about putting in a garden in the spring, growing vegetables and herbs. They talked about practical things and impossible dreams, and through it all, Juliette felt the walls around her heart slowly crumbling. Winter deepened, and the snow piled high around the cabin. They were isolated now, cut off from town except for the most necessary trips. But rather than feeling trapped, Juliette felt cocooned in safety and growing happiness. She and Quentin fell into a comfortable intimacy, sitting close by the fire, holding hands during evening talks, stealing kisses when the moment felt right. He never pushed for more, never demanded anything she was not ready to give. He seemed content to court her slowly, to build trust brick by brick. It was so different from Edward's approach, which had been all speed and pressure, securing her commitment before she really knew what she was agreeing to. One night in December, as they lay bundled in furs on the floor in front of the fireplace, watching the flames dance, Quentin said, "Tell me about something that makes you happy, something simple that brings you joy." Juliette thought about it. The first sip of coffee in the morning when it is still hot enough to burn, the sound of the creek in summer, the way the light comes through the trees in the afternoon and makes everything golden, the smell of bread baking, your smile. She turned to look at him. "What about you?" The moment right before dawn when the world is perfectly still and full of possibility, the weight of a good axe in my hands, the taste of snow when it is fresh, coming home and seeing smoke from the chimney and knowing you are inside waiting, your laugh. I do not laugh that much. You do not laugh enough, but when you do, it is the best sound in the world. I want to make you laugh more. He proceeded to tell her stories from his trapping adventures, increasingly ridiculous tales of mishaps and misunderstandings with wildlife. He told her about the time he tried to steal a fish from a bear and ended up running through the forest with the angry bear in pursuit. About the raccoon that broke into his cabin and proceeded to wash all his dried beans in the water bucket, rendering them useless. About trying to pet what he thought was a friendly cat and discovering it was actually a very annoyed bobcat. By the end, Juliette was laughing so hard her sides hurt, tears streaming down her face. Quentin watched her with satisfaction and undisguised love. "There it is," he said. "That is the sound I was looking for." She kissed him then, deeply, passionately, and for the first time, she felt ready for more. Quentin pulled back, searching her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I want this. I want you." They made love slowly, carefully, with Quentin attentive to every reaction, making sure she felt cherished and safe. It was nothing like her experiences with Edward, which had been perfunctory at best and cruel at worst. This was tender and passionate and full of genuine connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Juliette felt a contentment so deep it frightened her with its intensity. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. I'm terrified to say it, but I do. Quentin pulled her closer, his massive arms creating a shelter around her. I love you too. Have since about the third day you were here, when you got mad at that pot that would not sit level on the stove and gave it a lecture about its structural failings. She laughed, remembering. It was a poorly made pot. It was, but the point is, you make me happy, Juliette, every single day. I want to marry you if you will have me. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married on a clear January day by a circuit preacher who came through Ouray. Quentin had been nervous about going into town, worried about how people would treat Juliette, but she insisted. I am not going to hide anymore, she said. I have done nothing wrong, and I'm marrying you in front of anyone who wants to watch. As it turned out, not everyone in Ouray had turned against her. There were people who remembered that rumors were not facts, who believed in giving folks a fair chance. The preacher married them in front of the general store, with a small gathering of witnesses that included the blacksmith, a couple of miners, the new school teacher, and surprisingly, a shy young woman named Clara who worked at the hotel. Clara approached Juliette after the ceremony. I am glad you found happiness, she said quietly. My mother died of the same thing your husband did. Heart failure, the doctor said. Some kind of weakness in the organ that can kill suddenly. I just wanted you to know I never believed you poisoned him. I knew it was a natural death, and I'm sorry people said otherwise. Juliette felt tears slip down her cheeks. Thank you. You do not know how much it means to hear someone say that. Not everyone was supportive. Mrs. Hartley made a point of crossing the street to avoid them, and several townspeople whispered behind their hands. But Quentin stood beside Juliette, tall and immovable, his hand firmly holding hers, and his presence made her brave. They celebrated their wedding with a dinner at the hotel restaurant, a splurge that felt wonderfully decadent. Quentin ate his steak with obvious pleasure and said, You know, your cooking is still better than this. You're biased. I am honest. You have ruined me for anyone else's food. They spent their wedding night in the hotel room, which felt both luxurious and strange after months in the cabin. The bed was soft, the sheets clean and crisp, the room warm from a coal stove. But Juliette found herself missing the sound of the wind in the pines and the crackling of the wood fire. Ready to go home tomorrow? Quentin asked as if reading her thoughts. More than ready. This is nice, but home is better. Home, he repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. They returned to the cabin and settled into married life with surprising ease. Quentin built a proper bedroom addition as promised, with a real door and a window that looked out over the meadow. He made her a sewing table with good light and storage for her supplies. She planted seeds in carefully tended boxes, planning the garden she would put in come spring. In March, Juliette realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had feared she might never have children, that her body had somehow been broken by the years with Edward. But now, carrying Quentin's child, she felt the weight of new responsibility and fear. What if something went wrong? What if she could not be a good mother? What if the darkness of her past somehow infected this new innocent life? When she told Quentin, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. Then, he immediately set her down, worried he had been too rough. Are you okay? Did I hurt you? Should you be spinning? I'm fine. I'm pregnant, not fragile. You're carrying our baby. You're the most precious thing in the world right now. He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. We are going to be parents. Are you ready for this? Absolutely not, but we will figure it out together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Juliette's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that she preserved and canned for the coming winter. Her belly grew round, and she felt the baby move within her, little flutters that became stronger kicks as the months passed. Quentin was endlessly fascinated, placing his hands on her stomach to feel the movements, talking to the baby about the mountains and the forest, and all the things they would explore together. He was also ridiculously overprotective. He would not let her carry anything heavier than a basket of laundry, insisted she rest frequently, and worried constantly about her health. It was both endearing and occasionally frustrating. I'm not made of glass, she protested when he tried to stop her from scrubbing the floor. I know, but humor me. I cannot carry this baby for you, so let me help in the ways I can." In September, as the aspens began to turn gold and the air carried the first hints of autumn chill, Juliette went into labor. Quentin had ridden into town a week earlier to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Chen, and had convinced her to stay at the cabin until the baby came. Mrs. Chen was a practical woman with decades of experience and a no-nonsense attitude that Juliette found comforting. The labor was long and hard, stretching through the night and into the next day. Quentin paced outside like a caged mountain lion, wearing a path in the dirt. Several times he tried to come in, but Mrs. Chen shooed him away. "You will just be in the way. Let her work. She is strong." Finally, in the late afternoon, the baby came. A boy, healthy and strong, with his father's lung capacity based on the volume of his cries. Mrs. Chen cleaned him up and placed him in Juliette's arms. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt love so fierce it took her breath away. Quentin was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation, as if afraid to disturb them. When he saw his son, his face crumpled with emotion. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and touched the baby's tiny hand with one massive finger. The baby's hand closed around it instinctively. "He is perfect," Quentin whispered. "You are perfect. I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." "I know, I feel it too." They named him Jacob, and he became the center of their world. Quentin proved to be a surprisingly natural father, patient and gentle despite his size. He could calm the baby's cries with a low rumbling song, hold him securely in the crook of one arm while doing chores with the other. He made a cradle from smooth pine and carved animals into the headboard, deer and bears and eagles. Juliette watched them together and felt a contentment so complete it sometimes frightened her. Surely nothing this perfect could last. Surely something would come to destroy it. But months passed, and then a year, and their happiness held. Jacob grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved exploring the forest with his father, riding on Quentin's broad shoulders and pointing at everything with delight. Juliette's garden expanded, and she began selling her preserves and baked goods in town, earning a reputation that had nothing to do with her past and everything to do with the quality of her work. Slowly, gradually, the whispers about poison and murder faded. She became simply Mrs. Oakes, the mountain man's wife, the woman with the good bread and the happy child. New scandals arrived to occupy the gossips. Life moved on. One evening, when Jacob was 2 and Juliette was pregnant with their second child, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Jacob was playing with a carved horse Quentin had made, making it gallop across the porch boards with enthusiastic sound effects. "Are you happy?" Quentin asked. Juliette looked at her husband, at her son, at the home they had built together, at the mountains that had once seemed so alien and now felt like sanctuary. "I am more than happy. I am at peace. I never thought I would be able to say that." "You deserve it. You deserve all of this and more." "We both do." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in April surrounded by wildflowers. She had Juliette's auburn hair and green eyes, and a temperament as fierce as her mother's. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, who was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and observe the world around him. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Quentin built an additional room for the children, installed a larger stove, added a covered porch where they could sit even in the rain. The place that had once been a solitary trapper's shelter became a real home, filled with laughter and life. Juliette's reputation in town transformed completely. She was known now as a skilled baker and gardener, a devoted mother, and the wife of Quentin Oakes, who everyone agreed was one of the most honest and hard-working men in the valley. When people spoke of her first husband's death, if they spoke of it at all, it was with the understanding that it had been a natural tragedy, nothing more. Clara from the hotel became a close friend, often visiting the cabin with her own children to play with Juliette's. They would sit and sew together while the children ran wild in the meadow, and Clara would share the town gossip while Juliette shared the news from the high country. "You know what people say about you now," Clara said one day. "They say Quentin Oakes is the luckiest man in Colorado to have found such a fine wife. They used to say I was a murderer. People say a lot of foolish things. What matters is the truth, and the truth is you are good and kind, and you have built a beautiful life. Let the old rumors die. They have no power anymore." And Clara was right. The rumors did die, replaced by reality. Juliette was no longer defined by her past but by her present. She was a mother, a wife, a friend, a valued member of the community. She was herself, fully and finally. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Summers spent gardening and preserving food, teaching her children to identify plants and respect the forest. Autumns filled with the bustle of preparing for winter, watching the aspens turn gold, helping Quentin process the meat and furs from his hunting. Winters cozy in the expanded cabin, the family gathered around the fire while Quentin told stories and Juliette sewed and the children played. Springs bursting with new life, the meadow carpeted in wildflowers, the forest coming alive with birdsong. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, taking naturally to the work of trapping and hunting. By the time he was 15, he could track a deer through the forest, as well as Quentin could. Rose was fierce and independent, insisting on learning everything her brother did, refusing to be left behind. Thomas was gentle and artistic, carving beautiful figures from wood and drawing pictures of the wildlife around them. Quentin's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting into the mountain sun. But he was as strong as ever, still able to carry a full-grown buck down the mountain and chop enough firewood to last the winter. He looked at Juliette with the same love and wonder he had shown on their wedding day. Juliette herself changed too. The fear and trauma that had shadowed her in those early years faded to distant memory. She laughed easily now, smiled often, moved through her life with confidence and purpose. The lines on her face were from smiling, not frowning. Her hands were rough from work, but capable and strong. One evening, when Juliette was 46 and Quentin was 50, they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. Jacob was actually living in town now, working with the blacksmith and courting a nice young woman named Emily. Rose had recently announced her intention to become a doctor, a bold ambition that Juliette fully supported, having already started inquiries about medical schools back east that might accept a woman. Thomas was apprenticing with a furniture maker in Grand Junction, but came home frequently. "Empty nest," Quentin observed, reaching for Juliette's hand. "Not entirely empty, but yes, different." "Any regrets?" Juliette thought about the question seriously. She thought about the frightened woman who had arrived in Ouray 20 years ago, carrying nothing but a carpet bag and a terrible reputation. She thought about all the years since, the hard work and the joy, the fear transformed into courage, the loneliness replaced with love. "No," she said finally, "not a single one. Everything led me here, to this life, to you. I would not change any of it. Not even the hard parts. Not even those. They made me who I am. They taught me what I was capable of surviving, and they led me to appreciate what I have now." Quentin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Juliette Oakes. I have loved you since the moment you accepted my ridiculous offer to come live in the wilderness with a stranger. I will love you until my last breath, and probably beyond that. I love you too. You saved me, you know, not just from a bad situation, but from losing faith in people altogether. You showed me what real kindness looks like, what true partnership means. You gave me a life I never imagined I could have. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to do it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal, witnesses to their love story. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called and another answered. This was home. This was peace. This was love. A few years later, Jacob married Emily in a joyful ceremony in Ouray. They settled in town where Jacob had taken over the blacksmith shop, and within a year presented Juliette and Quentin with their first grandchild, a daughter named Lily. Juliette held the tiny baby and felt the circle of life completing itself. She was a grandmother now, had survived long enough to see her children grown and happy, had built a legacy of love instead of tragedy. Rose did go east for medical school, breaking barriers and making her parents proud. Her letters home were filled with stories of her studies and her determination to return to Colorado and serve the mountain communities that had shaped her. Thomas opened his own furniture shop in Grand Junction and gained a reputation for his beautiful, innovative designs. Through it all, Quentin and Juliette remained each other's constant. They grew old together in the mountain cabin, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Quentin's hair went fully silver, and he moved a bit more stiffly on cold mornings, but he still checked his trap lines and provided for them. Juliette's hands developed arthritis that made sewing more difficult, but she adapted, finding new ways to create beauty. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the cabin, Jacob and Emily with their 3 children. Rose, home from her medical practice in Denver, bringing her new husband, a fellow doctor who looked at her with obvious adoration, Thomas with his wife and twin boys. The cabin overflowed with people and noise and laughter and love. They had a feast that evening, with everyone contributing dishes. Juliette made her famous apple pie, the same one she had first attempted in those early nervous days. As they sat around the expanded table, Quentin raised his glass. "A toast," he said, "to my wife, who took a chance on a rough mountain man 30 years ago, who trusted me when she had every reason not to trust anyone, who built this family and this life with her strength and love. Everything good in my life comes from you, Juliette." "Hear, hear," echoed around the table, glasses raised, faces smiling. Juliette felt tears on her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness. "And to you," she said, looking at Quentin, "who saw me when everyone else saw only rumors and suspicion, who offered me safety and respect and love without conditions, who proved that good men really do exist. I was lost, and you helped me find myself." "You were never lost," Quentin said softly. "You always knew who you were. You just needed a place where you could be yourself freely." Later that night, after the family had dispersed to various sleeping arrangements throughout the cabin and in tents outside, Quentin and Juliette walked out to the meadow. The moon was nearly full, bathing everything in silver light. They walked hand in hand to the spot where Quentin had first brought her, where she had stood decades ago with nothing but hope and fear, trying to decide if she could trust this stranger. "Do you remember that first day?" Quentin asked. "Every detail. You were the biggest, most intimidating man I had ever seen, but your eyes were kind. You offered me a chance when no one else would. You said you would eat anything I cooked." Quentin laughed. "I did say that, probably not the most romantic proposal. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed to hear. It told me you were not afraid, that you trusted me, that you saw past the rumors to the person underneath. I am glad I stopped at the general store that day. Glad I overheard that conversation. Glad I had the courage to approach you." "Courage? You?" "It took courage. You were beautiful and clearly too good for a rough trapper. I thought you would laugh at my offer or be offended. But I couldn't just walk away. Something told me I had to try." Juliette leaned against his solid warmth. "I am so grateful you listened to that something. It changed everything." They stood together in the moonlight, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from the ruins of a tragedy, who had proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The mountains stood sentinel around them, unchanged and unchanging, while their human story played out in the meadow below. "Ready to go back inside?" Quentin asked eventually. "In a minute. I just want to stay here a bit longer, to remember, to appreciate. We can stay as long as you want. We have all the time in the world." And they did. They had weathered the storms and found their happiness. They had raised children who were good and strong and kind. They had built a legacy that had nothing to do with poison or death or tragedy, and everything to do with resilience and love and trust. When they finally walked back to the cabin, Juliette looked up at Quentin and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For everything. For believing in me. For loving me. For giving me this life." Quentin bent down and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that still, after 30 years, made her heart flutter. "The thanks go both ways. You gave me a reason to come home every day. You turned a cabin into a home, a lonely man into a husband and father. You are my everything, Juliette." Inside, their family slept peacefully, 3 generations sheltered by the home Quentin had built, and the love he and Juliette had nurtured. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, and the stars wheeled overhead, and the world continued its ancient rhythms. And in that moment, standing on the porch of their mountain cabin, Juliette Morrison Oakes knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just safety or security, though she had those. Not just respect or independence, though she had those too. She had found belonging. She had found home. She had found love in its truest, deepest form. The rumors that had once threatened to destroy her had faded into nothing, replaced by the reality of a life well lived. She was no longer the widow suspected of murder. She was Juliette Oakes, beloved wife, devoted mother, proud grandmother, valued member of her community. She was herself, fully and completely, without shame or fear. And it had all started with a mountain man who said he would eat anything she cooked, who saw past the accusations to the truth underneath, who offered her a chance when no one else would. Quentin had been her salvation and her partner, her protector and her equal. He had shown her what love could be when it was given freely, without conditions or control. As they prepared for bed that night, surrounded by the sounds of their sleeping family, Quentin pulled Juliette close. "Best 30 years of my life," he murmured. "Mine too," she whispered back. "Worth every moment, every challenge, every fear. All of it was worth it to end up here, with you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their match, two hearts beating in harmony. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and the creek babbled its eternal song, and the mountains kept their silent vigil. Life in the high country continued its rhythm, seasons turning, years passing, love enduring. Many more years would pass, grandchildren would grow and have children of their own. The cabin would see generations of family gatherings and celebrations. Quentin and Juliette would grow very old together, their bodies failing, but their minds sharp and their love undiminished. When Quentin finally passed at the age of 78, Juliette held his hand and whispered words of love, thanking him one last time for the extraordinary life they had built together. She scattered his ashes on the ridge where he had buried Red Jack all those years ago, where he could see the whole valley spread out below. And when she visited his resting place, which she did often, she would tell him about the family, about the newest great-grandchild, about the garden and the mountains and all the small, beautiful details of life. Juliette herself lived to be 86, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who adored her. She spent her final days in the cabin she and Quentin had built together, looking out over the meadow that had been her sanctuary. Rose was there with her at the end, her daughter who had become a doctor, who held her hand and told her it was okay to let go. "Tell me again," Juliette whispered. "Tell me about the first day you brought Dad home from school and he taught you to track rabbits in the meadow." Rose smiled through her tears and told the story, one of hundreds that made up the tapestry of their family's history. When Juliette took her last breath, she was smiling, thinking of Quentin, of their children, of the extraordinary life that had emerged from the darkest moment of her past. They buried her next to Quentin on the ridge, where they could both watch over the valley together. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own memories to its walls. And the story of Juliette and Quentin became family legend, told and retold around fires and dinner tables. They told how she had arrived in Ouray with nothing but accusations following her, how the mountain man had offered her a chance when no one else would, how they had fallen in love in the high country and built a family that would endure for generations. They told how Quentin had said he would eat anything she cooked, trusting her when trust was the most precious gift he could give. They told how love had conquered suspicion, how courage had overcome fear, how two wounded souls had found healing in each other. And in the telling and retelling, the story took on the quality of myth, of fairy tale, though every word was true. It became a reminder that love could be found in the most unlikely places, that redemption was always possible, that sometimes all someone needed was a single person willing to believe in them. The mountains stood witness to it all, unchanging and eternal, holding the memory of Juliette and Quentin's love in their ancient stone. The meadow where they had walked together bloomed every spring with wildflowers, a living memorial to their story. The cabin sheltered new generations, its walls soaked with decades of love and laughter. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this one, Quentin and Juliette walked hand in hand through endless forests and meadows, together for eternity as they had been in life, their love story complete and perfect and never-ending. They had proven that the human heart is capable of remarkable resilience, that love can bloom even in the hardest soil, that trust can be rebuilt even after it has been shattered. Juliette Morrison had arrived in Ouray, Colorado in 1878 as a woman fleeing her past, shadowed by accusations of murder. She had left this world decades later as Juliette Oakes, beloved matriarch of a large and loving family, her legacy one of strength and love and unwavering courage. The whispers about poison had long since faded, replaced by stories of her generosity, her skill, her devotion to her family. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth that had started everything. A mountain man had looked at a woman everyone else feared and had said, in essence, "I trust you. I believe in you. I will take that risk." That trust had been the seed from which everything else grew. It had given Juliette the safe space she needed to heal and grow and become fully herself. It had been the foundation upon which they built their entire lives. In the end, love won. Trust triumphed over suspicion. Truth outlasted lies. And two people who should never have met, who came from different worlds and had every reason to remain strangers, found in each other the perfect complement, the missing piece, the answer to every question they had been asking. Their story became a beacon for others facing darkness, a reminder that new beginnings are always possible, that we are not defined by our worst moments or by what others say about us, but by who we choose to be and who chooses to stand beside us. Quentin had chosen to stand beside Juliette when everyone else turned away, and that choice had made all the difference. The Wild West was a harsh place, unforgiving and dangerous, where justice was often rough and mercy rare. But it was also a place of new beginnings, where people could reinvent themselves, where the past could be left behind. Juliette and Quentin had seized that opportunity and made something beautiful from it. They had taken the raw materials of their lives, her tragedy and his solitude, and forged them into a love story for the ages. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the lessons their lives taught. That courage is sometimes simply the willingness to take another chance. That love is as much about trust as it is about passion, that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect and support, that we all have the capacity to heal and be healed, that sometimes the most unlikely person is exactly the right person. As the decades turned into a century and beyond, the story of Juliette and Quentin Oakes remained part of Ouray's history. The cabin on the ridge became a landmark, carefully preserved by the family. Visitors would hike up to see it, to stand in the meadow and imagine the woman who had arrived with nothing and the man who had given her everything, to feel the echo of their love in that wild and beautiful place. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the pines just right, locals swore they could hear laughter carrying down from the ridge, the sound of two souls who had found their happy ending and were living it still, bound together by a love that had outlasted mortality itself. Whether that was true or simply the way stories grow in the telling, no one could say for certain. But it was a lovely thought, and in the end, perhaps that was enough. What was certain was this. Once upon a time in the Wild West, in the mountains of Colorado, a woman accused of murder and a mountain man who trusted his instincts over gossip had found each other. They had built a life together that proved love could overcome anything, that faith in another person was never misplaced when given to the right one, that the courage to start over could lead to more happiness than anyone dared imagine. They said she poisoned her first husband. The mountain man said he would eat anything she cooked. And from that simple act of trust grew a love story that would endure for generations, a testament to the power of seeing people for who they truly are, rather than who others claim them to be. In a world that often rushed to judgment, Quentin Oakes had chosen to believe in Juliette Morrison, and that choice had changed both their lives forever, creating ripples that extended far beyond their own existence, touching countless lives that came after. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, of two imperfect people creating something perfect together. It was a story that needed to be told and remembered, because in remembering it, others might find the courage to trust again, to love again, to believe that happy endings are possible even after the darkest beginnings. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all.